What is going on, everybody? This is your boy, Nathan Crankfield, the host of the Seeking Excellence podcast. And I'm joined today by my new friend, Jason Ball. Jason, how we doing?
Doing great today. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm, first time on a podcast and excited to be here with you.
Awesome. Yeah, no, excited to have you, man. I remember David hit me up on Instagram. This all happened really fast, which is really exciting. I think for sure, at least I hope in 2022, this will be the quickest from scheduling to posting that we'll have, which is pretty fun. But yeah, no, still great to have you. And David Calavita hit me up and wanted to do something. He's been a guest on the podcast before as well. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, excited to have you.
He does some wonderful stuff with Lifeteen, and outside of Lifeteen, he's doing so much.
Yeah, great dude. And I mean, I think we always like really support and relate to each other. And he shares a lot of bold messages, and really tries to stand for the truth in a lot of capacities. And so we had a really great conversation. I just love the stuff that he does.
Yeah, that's also, I was chatting with him as we were preparing for some different retreats, and knowing some of the stuff that he's posting and his boldness as he goes.
Yeah,
we were just sharing it, and it was like one to the other. It just kept getting bigger and bigger. Like, wait a minute, this is what we got to go do. We got to get out there and get men alive as we work in this world. And tackle major things. So yeah, it's exciting to spend time with him and to hear his ideas and his passion really for what's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think and the way you put that right there is really well put in getting men alive. I think that's really what I've seen is there's just a lot of sleepers out there. And I think a lot of people who don't recognize their potential, men who don't recognize their power and recognize their calling that they have in their lives. So excited to talk about that. But before we go into all that, would love to just get a little bit more background on your life, who you are, where you're from, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. I can do that for sure. So I'm the youngest of four boys. I grew up in a rambunctious household in suburbs of Atlanta. As you can imagine, our house is just crazy, but it was awesome to grow up in a house full of men. My mom suffered through it, did an awesome job of raising four boys and giving us the ability to go out and be wild at heart as we went. For me, I met my wife in middle school. We dated for 8 years through middle school, high school and college, graduated from University of Clemson in South Carolina with a degree in horticulture, hoping to be a farmer was my goal in life. And I got married. We've been married now for 25 years, 5 children, ranged in age from 21 to 3. So a very fullness of life as we go. Ran a landscape business for about 9 years in Atlanta. And the goal behind that was thinking it would lead towards a farm, plant material, that type of stuff. And instead, where it led me was to Lifeteen. So that's where I am now. I worked for Lifeteen for the last 16 years. I started out as a facility manager running our camps at Covecrest in Tiger, Georgia. And just an awesome time of outdoors. It's where my heart really comes to life. So me as a man, it's the outdoors. I try to spend as little time in an office as possible and really out and creating as we go. So the last 6 years, I've led our camps and missions for Lifeteen and just trying to really expand, reach more teens so they can go to a place and encounter the Lord. That's our strongest desire, really. My strongest desire is that people would encounter the Lord and have a powerful experience to come into full relationship and then have him really lead them through life is the goal. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. That's the quick and dirty of it, which has been a full life and amazing and spectacular to go through. So
I love it. Do you find yourself being more of a Clemson fan? Like, were you a Georgia fan growing up? Like, where's kind of your balance there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. No, actually, I was never a Georgia fan. I actually grew up. I went to soccer camp at Clemson when I was young. And so that rivalry between Clemson and Georgia has always been my favorite game. Yeah. So it was heartbreaking this year to lose that one. I was ecstatic for Georgia to, finally kind of win the national championship after 40 years. But, I got to tell you, until 2015, not a lot of people knew about Clemson until they started knocking on the door of Alabama and national championships.
Yeah.
So no, I grew up as a Clemson fan and loved that rivalry though.
Yeah, it had to be awesome for you to, get to experience the rise of Clemson after many years of, really not a lot of national attention for them.
No, and my kids, they think that's the norm now. They don't remember the years. They were too young I lived through the years where, the 6-6 seasons and,
Yeah,
just kind of getting by. So
rugged.
certainly enjoyed, that rise.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm a big Michigan fan for college football, and I feel like I had that same experience this year, where like a lot of young Ohio State fans were like talking a lot of trash after Michigan beat them this year, and I'm like, what you don't understand, young Ohio State fan, is that like in the last 21 matchups, Michigan's 11-10. You're just
Right.
used to like the last 9 years you guys
That's
won.
the,
You know what I mean? But like the decade before that, it was reversed, you know? And I'm like,
yeah.
yeah, these young kids, man, they don't understand that it wasn't always like this, you know?
Wasn't always good. That's right. But for me, that means like, all right, if we have a bad year, that's okay. We keep
Right.
pushing through. It'll
Yeah.
come back around at some point.
Yeah. You can remain a little bit more optimistic. It's not as dire when there's
Yeah.
yeah,
It'll be
not great
interesting. See, I
success.
was happy to see Michigan come back because the Big Ten really needed
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. It's more fun when it's competitive
that.
versus just like a straight up dominant team. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Well, that's great, man. That's awesome. And you mentioned in there, you just kind of talked about, being raised in the youngest of four boys and being wild at heart. Are you a big John Eldridge guy, or did you just happen to use that terminology?
Oh, I did. I have read a couple of Eldridge books
Yeah.
later in life, much later in life. But
Okay.
yeah, a lot of what he said in his books, my household was wild like that. I think there are
Yeah.
always holes in walls and paint and craziness as we went. Being the youngest of four, uh, we lived out where there were lots of woods and things like that.
Mm.
So definitely that opportunity to go out and build forts. And so when I read his books, I really related to him though.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I read, I think, Wild at Heart in college, and I went on to read three more in like my first couple years outside, like after I had graduated. And I think it was really good for me, like in the time that I was, you know what I mean? I was like doing my infantry thing, and I was not a kid who spent a lot of times in the woods. I spent a lot of times like biking around, played a lot of outdoor basketball, football, like a lot of sports outside, like pick up and like, organized, but did not spend as much time in the woods. So I was really learning and like entering into that pretty deep in my first couple years in the army. As you can imagine. Yeah, really
I
get
have a
used
good
to.
friend after his time in the army. He doesn't camp anymore. He's like, no, I had enough.
Yeah,
I had enough.
yeah, hiking, camping, skydiving, like all those types of things. I feel like people are like, yeah, you at least need some time. I did go
Yeah.
on a hike this past year, and I was like, it was kind of fun. You know what I mean? I was like, I kind of enjoyed that. Without 90 pounds on your back, it is much more pleasant. So, yeah, recognizing that's important. But yeah, I think it's so big, and just I think a lot of times I speak to this for mothers of sons
Mm.
or future mothers of sons, because you know what I mean. Like a lot of people, a lot of my peers are not mothers yet, or they're very early, young mothers. But mothers of sons, and even like for fatherhood, but also for men for their own lives, to recognize like the importance of like experiencing your wildness.
Yeah.
And it is, I think, incredibly difficult. And I think John Eldridge does a great job of speaking to that, especially mothers' common flaws and mistakes that they make in like over sheltering their kids.
Yep.
And I had to I share this a lot of times when I speak to men or to young groups of young, to boys, who are in high school, where I talk about, I had to have some tough conversations with my mom and grandmother,
Mm.
especially once I had like graduated from Ranger school, and I'm like about to deploy to Afghanistan as a platoon leader of, an airborne infantry unit. And I'm like, yeah, so like this whole like babying me thing, like probably now's a good time to call it. We're about 8 years too late. And even that's probably not true, probably 10 to 12 years too late for this. But
Yeah.
now, yeah, we're like far overdue, and I'm gonna need you to hold back on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, completely. I think I'm 48 now. I think even still to this day, there's some times where I'm 12 in my mom's eyes, and
Right.
that, like, okay, I think I got this, as we go forward, and I
I
think
think I got it. I love it.
that's
Yeah,
good.
for real.
But you're exactly right. I think what happens in a lot of cases is that people are scared of that masculinity, that wild at heart.
Mhm.
And you and I both know, and when it's used appropriately and in the right ways, it's absolutely beautiful, and it's exactly what our world needs. And that's the lesson. It's not something to be afraid of. It's not something to stay away from. It's something to actually embrace. So I was
Right.
grateful for that as I grew up. My dad was also an outdoorsman and really embraced adventure, whether it's outdoors or just trying new things. And so how do we enter into that part of our hearts that drives us forward and gets us, whether it's an outdoorsy, whether it's experiencing something new, it's not something to be afraid of. but it's something to embrace and go into. So he did a great job of raising us as boys to be able to do that. For me growing up, and I think where Eldridge's book came in, and a great group of men throughout my life at different times, was, okay, where's the Lord in that though? So how do we, use it for good, but really use it for God's will even? And because there's a lot of beautiful things that can come out of that wild of heart that really help the world and do great things. So it's just a matter of harnessing it correctly and really, using it appropriately as we go. But I think it scares a lot of people, especially mamas.
Oh
They're,
yeah.
wait, what is this?
Yeah.
Go forward. So,
Absolutely. No, and it is obviously, and like you see this like increase in talking about toxic masculinity, and I think that's a lot of times a fear of when it can go wrong, or when it's just kind of, you know, it just becomes twisted in a certain sense. You know what I mean? Or you use your power and strength for evil things instead of for good. But that often comes with just this extreme reaction to it, where it's like just mute it altogether, which can't be the solution. But another thing I want that you made me think of there was, there's another book by one of John Eldridge's kind of like mentees, Morgan Snyder, called Becoming a King. And one of my favorite things he talked about in that book, like I feel like every book I read, I had like one kind of like big takeaway from it, and my big takeaway from him was like the importance for men to like learn skills, and I think this is interesting, like hearing about your like landscaping business and things like that, because he talks about like gardening, or he could be riding a horse, or training a dog, or learning to fight, like jujitsu and things like that, marksmanship, like learning how to fire and like handle a weapon, like these different things, and not just like learning one, but like over your lifetime, like trying to accumulate several different things, but how much that awakens man. And we talked about that before we started, like awakening men and awakening masculinity, how important that is, you know what I mean, and trying to get yourself active and getting more involved in those types of skills. What has been your experience with stuff like that?
It's interesting as you started to say that, it took me back to a conversation I had probably 3 weeks ago with my wife. So I have,
Mm.
out of my 5 kids, I have 2 older girls, 2 younger girls, and my son smack dab in the middle.
Oh wow.
And I, we always give them a hard time and say, man, you're going to make a woman happy one day, because you're really going to know your wife,
Right.
how to walk with a household of women as we go. But, he's 15 now. And so as we were talking about his formation, as he comes into his teenage years full-heartedly, what does that look like? And as we kind of sat with that, it was, hey, how do we introduce him to these different experiences? And some of it was, the other day I had him driving a truck and a trailer. What does that look like to step out? Some of these experiences of putting in sinks and just those skills that come into it. And it does two things for us. I think one, it builds our confidence as men of, hey, I can create, I can, I can contribute, right, to society, to my family, all of these things as we go. And it builds our confidence in that as we go. And then the other thing it does for me as I'm walking through it with him is it opens up conversations, right? Now that we've had a shared encounter together of, toilet work or whatever it might be, that's, sometimes fun, sometimes gross, but it's okay. Hey, we did this together. It then opens up other conversations and gives the ability for me to speak into his heart and for him to speak into my heart as a man as well, and continue that formation. So, it's interesting. Yeah, as you started to say that, that's exactly where my mind went to, was that formation. And it's interesting because as we go with where I am in Lifeteen and in leading our missions, one of the key things we do is working around our camps. And so we'll have missionaries that come for a year. And inevitably, quite a few of those men have never worked with power tools before, never driven a tractor, never towed a trailer before. And it's awesome throughout a year, the formation that comes just from entering into projects like that, or work, that it opens up their heart and they realize, I'm discovering a part of myself that I didn't even know was there. I've either tried to push it away because for whatever reason it wasn't open to me, but now it is. And so that's one of our key things, is this work formation as we go, how it can bring life to us as men.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, man. It's so necessary. And I think, I was really impacted too, what you said about wanting to get outside and not sit in an office as much as possible, and I think we have seen a very correlated and potentially causal decline in masculinity as we've seen an incline in office life.
Mm,
This more, especially like I really fear for a lot of men. I work from home, but I fear for a lot of men and for masculinity from like, there's a lot of comfort that comes from this. You know what I
right.
mean? And like, it's hard working from home to not just wear sweatpants every day,
Yeah.
like, cause it's just so easy and you can
Right.
just wear I'm wearing sweatpants right now, and my feet are in my slippers and like I'm sitting at the house, but like, it's so important to make sure, in the times where you have that extra time to like make sure I'm going to the gym and I'm playing basketball with guys and I'm pushing myself, physically and doing some of these other things because you do just you do like I think a lot of men don't realize enough and women don't realize enough too that like your natural default as a human being is to be mentally soft.
Right.
And we live in such a comfortable world now that and like things are I love the when people talk about like especially some of like the social, cultural, political like revolts and things that we have going on right now. A lot of people point to be like life in America is so good that people have to make up stuff. Like people are like making up battles. You point to this a lot, especially in like the race world when it comes to made up like hate crimes and things like that. Like there's so many hate crime hoaxes. And it's like if things are as bad as you say they are, like they didn't have to make up hate crime hoaxes in the 60s, like
Right.
that's because it was real. And people don't realize that like we naturally become soft over time and we have so much comfort now
Mm,
that it's we're more in danger of that than ever before. And I remember hitting that point 2 years ago, and that's why I did Exodus 90. And then last year, I still felt like I was kind of get to that. I was like, I want to do something mentally tough. And the
yeah.
Lord had a little humor, and I tore my Achilles. And so learning how to walk again was pretty tough.
Woo.
Did not enjoy that. It was definitely very mentally challenging while not always being the most physically challenging, just like sitting on
Yeah.
the couch all the time and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was a rough year, but yeah, I just think it's so important, to like take the time to get outside and do difficult things and just like go running in the rain and like random stuff. Like I love
Yeah.
listening to David Goggins and Jocko talk about that stuff. And some people look at them like they're psychos. And like I think David Goggins is a psycho because he does it all the time. But like it's good to do that stuff sometimes, like go on a run when it's cold.
Yeah. That's right. That's where I was this morning. For me, I come to life out there and mentally, I'm able to silence a lot of the other noise in my life, right? And
Yeah.
really then focus on uh, the Lord speaking. I'll pray and then I'll go for a run, and it's amazing how going through that little bit of exertion outside where it's uncomfortable and hard and pushing myself
Yeah.
is amazing. I actually did Exodus 90 last year myself, and I was reflecting on it. I've had probably 3 times in my life where the Lord really desired to move boldly in my life. I would start moving in that direction, and then He'd bring together a group of men at the right time for me to then journey with and to be a part of.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was reflecting on was there's a non-denominational preacher here in Atlanta who often, when he speaks about dating, he's talking to a single person. He's like, "Hey, you're looking for a certain type of person. Maybe you
Yeah.
should be that person,
Oh,
right? You should seek
yeah.
to be that type in what you're looking for." And so for me as a man, I remember my first major conversion in life. Um, I was newly married, newly in 4 years into it, and had been seeking those comforts that you're talking about. Right? It's so easy.
Yeah.
Of what can I take from the world? How can this feed me? What can I use? And the Lord spoke
Yeah.
very clearly one night at Mass about going on a mission trip. So going out into Honduras, where it's uncomfortable. I'm sharing rooms with a lot of people. We're digging trenches. We're in an orphanage, and I'm surrounded by a group of young men that weren't just trying to take from life, but were really beautiful examples of, hey, there is a God. He desires me. I may not be perfect, but I'm going to give it all I can, to
Yeah.
be a godly and live that life. So to be surrounded, by that group of men for the next few years after that was amazing to then just see the growth that came. But
Yeah.
it was in an uncomfortable spot. Um, but I was already seeking it, and then the Lord provided, right, a group of
Yeah.
men to journey with, which is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
So, you
And a
know,
lot I think don't reach that place of openness of like where you really are
yeah,
open to whatever it takes. And I think, yeah, there is something about like, the Lord wants this in all forms of like this is kind of like the heart of discipleship, I think, where it's like like God doesn't want you to be like, have this conditional yes.
mm,
Or it's either like, yes, I'll do this as long as like X, Y, and Z don't happen. You know what
right,
I mean? Or yes, I'll do it if you promise me X, Y, or Z. And it's like so many people in the world today. I think part of it's too like the customization that we live in. Like Emily and I were just talking 2 nights ago, I think, about how like people don't shop in person anymore.
Right.
And it's like, because when you're online, like you just have endless amounts of things that you can shop for. You can customize everything, the exact color that you want, your size, like everything's customizable. And I think that we have that customize your life mentality where
Mm.
it's like you don't have an openness to accept whatever it is, which is one of the things I'm so grateful for of like my time in the army, especially when I look back on my time at Ranger School, is like you have to be willing to go in, and they tell you this countless times before you start, and just be like, whatever happens,
Yeah.
like I'm not going to quit, and I'm just going to keep going, like no matter what, no matter how, if it rains every day, no matter if it gets below freezing, no matter if I recycle every phase and have to do it over again, no matter if I have a crappy team, who sucks and I have to like carry the slack or whatever it is. It's like, no, you just do it. And
Yep.
that kind of mentality easily gets left behind in places like that. It was just another thing that I've learned, that a lot of people don't carry that into their life. And that's why I think it's more the exception than the norm, of people who do. But yeah, just like as men, especially, we have to have that mentality of like, yes, Lord, you think of Saint Joseph, you think of Abraham or Moses, like they didn't have like, we look back and we read their full lives, right? And so it's easy to be like, they probably knew all this going in. It's
That's
like,
right.
no, dude. Yeah, like Saint Joseph didn't know they were going to Egypt when he said
Right.
yes, you
That's right.
know? And that was like 9 months later, 6 months later. It's like he didn't know that. And so it's like there's just this cowardice to and fear of just like giving this unconditional yes. And then God does provide these crazy opportunities and men and other people who are going to challenge you and help you to be that person. But he's not going to do it if you're just going to be some soft. I often call people hoes on the podcast, when they're being soft. That's one of my go-to terms. It's not necessarily biblical, but if you're just going to be soft and cowardly, like you're not going to get the full road ahead. You know what I mean?
Right. Oh, 100%. It's interesting as you talk about some of those biblical figures. For me, it's Joshua. As I think about
Mm,
Joshua, and it's so easy to read the book of Joshua. Of course, the Israelites conquered this, and but
yeah.
remember, for 40 years, they didn't know whether they could do it or not, right? They
Right.
doubted and all that. And you're right. We look back at it and say, yeah, of course he was. But what it took from him was that daily engagement of trust and stepping forward and one day at a time. But then always
Right.
going back to the Lord and saying, okay, before each battle, praying. Because I think that one of the things I realized after Exodus 90 was that we will enslave ourselves again to something. We desire comfort so much, right? That
Yeah.
one of the good things that comes out of that discipline and such is the ability to tell where our weaknesses are and where I will tend to turn to when I'm uncomfortable, when I want to seek um, that peace. I guess we think it's peace. It doesn't end up being. It ends up enslaving us. But when I look at it, it's that daily walk of then coming back, right, to the Lord
Yeah.
and saying, okay, where are we going today? And you know what? You've never forsaken me. I'm going to say yes again. I'm going to go forward, but I'm going to go forward wholeheartedly, not reservedly. I need to, if I'm going to do this and you really want me to do this. And that's exactly what I look at Joshua, that's steadfast. But God does tell him what, 7, 8, 9 times, do not fear. Do not fear.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Starts in Deuteronomy and goes all the way through. So, for me, is he knows that in our humanness, we need that reassurance. He knows our weaknesses to then
Right.
turn back and get scared and in fear, enslave ourselves to something else to seek comfort. So he tells us constantly, hey, don't fear. I'm with you and I have created you and you're strong and you're bold and you can handle this as you go.
Mm,
But the beautiful thing about an Exodus 90 or mission trips and things like that, that community that surrounds you, that supports you as you go,
yeah. It's
such
huge.
a key piece, right? To have a group of men, and your time in the army, you don't send one soldier out by himself. It's a
Yeah.
group that are going out, right, to do
For
it
sure. Yeah. You
because
need that.
one gets kicked off.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. I love it, man. And I think it's the importance of speaking specifically to the biblical characters, is that's the importance of reading scripture and really entering into it and like meditating upon scripture and not just reading it like it is some historical story, but actually trying to like enter in, with the Holy Spirit and be like, talk like, let me experience this. Let me experience some of the feelings these guys felt and what it was like. Cause it's so easy to make excuses, for like I used to always say this like in terms of athletes, One of my favorite quotes I've ever said on the podcast that a lot of people picked up afterwards, I didn't like prepare for, was all the people who were like, if I was 6'8", I'd be LeBron James too. And I was like, no, your fat ass wouldn't. Because if you are, you know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
he's not only 6'8", but he's like fulfilling his physical potential. And trust me, I have plenty of problems with LeBron now. I'm not a huge
Sure.
LeBron, as a person endorser, but still, like, physically, like, he's fulfilling his potential. Think of Tom Brady. Like,
Yep.
he like eats, sleeps, like everything he does is like to be excellent at football. And it's like we're not even close to that in any area of our lives. Like, we don't pursue excellence in that, to that degree, in anything. So it's like this idea that men have all this, and it's always from men. Well, if I was 250, if I was this, if I was you, if I was that, I'd probably be that too. And it's like, no, dude, like, you don't understand. I think of St. Thomas More has been my example of the year. I feel like he's my patron saint of the year. Maybe going forward, I just like have fallen in love with him even more in the last like 60 days. And I think of like his situation, and I'm like, how many men today are cowards in the face of standing up for what they believe in because they have a family to provide for, or because they have fear of losing their jobs, or because they think that they'll be hated by certain groups of people, or whatever it is. Like, everything that he faced, you know what I mean? Like, his like top 10 things that he had to consider before literally entering into his death, just for the sake of like not uttering one sentence, because he knew it was false. Like, how profound that is. And like, he's a saint in the church. And we look and we have our own lives, and we just have this like fear, and like, God won't provide for me, and I
Right.
can't live if these people don't like me. And what if I lose this job? Then what? And like, there's no trust, there's no fortitude. And so you can look at not only biblical characters, but also so many great saints,
Right.
who have lived these extreme, awesome, amazing lives, who we ought to look up to and emulate. That when it comes to our own times, we just have this like excuse. But that men don't want that, because I always say, like, nobody like played the side. Like, when I was shooting basketball growing up, in my front yard, like, I didn't practice being the person who like was standing under boxing out and watching the game winning shot. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't count
Yeah.
down and like act like I was watching the ball go through like I was taking
Right.
it.
You
And
were
but
the
so
guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But at some point that dies, I think, in a lot of men.
No, I think, you hit it there too, in that, we can look at it and become the victim of anything that we,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's our height or weight, whatever it might be, where we were born, the financial aspects that we've been privy to or not been, right? And we can make
Yep.
all of those excuses. And it kind of goes back um, to where I said, okay, are you going to start becoming what you're seeking or not?
Mm.
As you go, are you going to put in that effort and that excellence? And you talked about it physically. My son I played soccer. Soccer's his sport. He absolutely loves it. Wants to play in college. I said, do you really want it in college or not? Because all these stars, the LeBron James, right? They
Yeah.
didn't just show up one day and start playing.
No.
It's all that time behind the scenes. They're getting up in the morning. They're working out. You know, all of those aspects so that they can physically be in their prime to then go and be effective, right, in the game.
Yep.
So my son, I mean, praise the Lord, he heard me, and he goes out and spends 2 hours a day. He's running drills, all of these things because he really desires it. Now, that's an aspect of it, right? The Lord
Yeah.
will come into it, all of those things. But are we willing to put in that work, or are we going to say, I don't live in the right town? We live in the mountains. Soccer's not a big deal up here, right? So
Right. Yeah.
he could easily say, if I lived in
In the mountains
Atlanta,
in the South. Yeah.
right? He's like, if I lived in Atlanta, I could easily go and play soccer somewhere. But okay, you can make excuses, or you can get out there and work hard at it, right? And
Right.
and that aspect of physically going into it in the training, uh, and hey, don't be a victim, as we go. And I think you're right that when I see that, either in myself at times, I start to make an excuse, that slippery slope of going down and saying, okay, am I going to do that? Because I don't think it's one day we wake up and we found ourselves on the sidelines. I
Right.
think it's a decision here and a decision there that pushes us down there, right, as we go.
Exactly.
And so I think that self-reflection, and for me, it comes each morning as I go in and I pray each morning, and I spend that time with the Lord. There's that reflection on the day before. Hey, where
Mm.
did I show up? Where did I do well? Where did I give my all? Where did I really seek to be the man that I should be, integrity wise? Where did I seek to be the man that really leads well within my current role, whether that's within my family or in a place that I work? All of those, but because I think if I don't see it today, a spot that I missed the opportunity to get better in, then I'm going to keep going down a slippery slope, right? And that slope
Right.
if I'm not careful. So I think you're exactly right. As we go, it takes a daily um, training in all aspects, whether that's in our physical, our spiritual, in our emotional. Am I willing to share my heart? Right? I'm married. I have 5 kids. I could walk in and be completely non-existent emotionally to my family at the end of the day because of
Mhm.
maybe everything that I dealt with, right, in the day.
Yeah.
Or I can be the man in the house that says, no, I'm going to come up. And when I get home, I'm going to be emotionally available to my kids and hear what happened in their day. And in our house, once they're in bed, I'm going to do that for my wife. I'm going to be emotionally present to my
Right.
wife, you know?
Yeah.
And with that, there comes that fullness of life, I think, as we go. But
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, I think with the going back to the victimhood piece, I don't know if you read any Jordan Peterson, and I think he gave this like in a talk one time, but Noelle Maring, who's a great Catholic author, she wrote Awake Not Woke and Theology of Home and things like that. She's awesome. She was on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and she quotes this like great like almost like litany of things that we could also base like equity and equality off. He's like, why just race and gender? He's like, what about people who are obese? What about people who are less attractive? What about people who were raised in divorced homes? People who were, had to go through the adoption process, or you know
yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean, like had to live in foster care, or that he's like, he just goes on this whole list of like 100 things, that also attribute oftentimes to success or failure in life and
right.
differences in outcome. And he's like, why not just this? And I think his whole point is that like, let's just make none of it matter, and like try to help people who clearly need help and take ownership for our own lives. I think that's the same thing. So many men live through that. And it's one of the most frustrating things to hear is this like, well, if only I had this, or if I lived here, if I had that. And it was one of the most game changing things in my life was to stop listening to that voice that wanted to make excuses. And I still do. I mean, we all fall prey to it, right? Like we all have it happen. But it's tough to start to discern that, because there are like legitimate times, right? Like when you have a torn Achilles or something like that, like you have to, sometimes you have to rest, right? It's like some things are not just an excuse. There are reasons, but starting to discern that and like be honest with yourself about like what is going to happen in your life, what you have, what you're going to achieve, it is really important, I think, to let a lot of that stuff go. But love that story of your son too, of just like the whole like digging the well before you're thirsty kind of mindset, because so many men especially, but I think people in general, want to have skills in the time when it's needed that they never prepared for, and they never developed in the time leading up to the moment when it was necessary. And yeah, it's just not a good way to live your life.
No, it's interesting. I don't know if you ever saw that. It's an older movie now, but Facing the Giants, where it's
I don't
it's
think so. The football one? Yeah.
yeah, it's a
I've
football
seen the
one.
rolling scene,
Okay,
or
yeah,
the he's like crawling on his hands and knees, the give me
that's
your
right.
best.
That's
Yeah.
right. He's carrying the guy on his back and all that.
Yeah.
So I think my son saw that movie early on in his life. But the thing that struck me in that is there's a gentleman who's walking through the hallways and he's praying for the students at each locker door as he goes.
Mm,
And somebody stops him and says, "Hey, what are you praying for?" And as they're talking through it, he's praying for the seeds to be planted, right? He's praying that the fields be prepared so that when it comes, they're ready for it as they go.
right.
So, so many people, in that movie, this coach wanted success. And he said, but are you preparing the fields? Are you investing basically in these young people now to
Yeah.
then be ready when it comes? And I think about that all the time. For us within Lifeteen, our ministry is investing in young people. Why? They're the future of our church, right? They're the
Yeah.
future of not just our church, they're the future of our society and our world. If we want a society that really cares for people, we got to look at our teenagers right now, and they got to know that we care for them, that we love them,
Hmm.
and that we want the best for them, right? And that we're willing to step out and do that as we go, because they're the future. So let's prepare the field. Let's, so that when the rain comes and everything comes down and it starts to blossom, there's a strong foundation underneath it as we go. So that was one of the things I always took away from that movie, was just like, hey, am
That's
I
awesome.
preparing my fields, or I just want to hope that it shows up one day? Am I
Right.
going to do that work beforehand? So
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And you got to be a dumb farmer to try to go out and just like yield crops right away.
right,
You know what
just
I
hope
mean?
that it's going to rain and something's going to come up out of that ground as it
Yeah.
goes, right? I mean, it takes all that. And I think about that, whether it's for me as a father, for me as a husband. One of the lessons I learned early on as a husband, my father-in-law, twice a year, didn't matter what was going on, he took his wife and they went away for the weekend, right? So my wife was raised in a home that she knew implicitly that marriage was the cornerstone, was important, that if that marriage thrived, then their family would thrive.
Yeah.
And so when we got married, we from our get-go for the last 25 years, we go away for a weekend in the spring and a weekend in the fall. Sometimes we've sent our kids away and we
Yeah.
stayed home because we didn't have any money.
Yeah.
Sometimes we've gone camping, and other times we've gone nice places. But what that message is that's sent to my kids is, hey, I'm going to invest today in my marriage because it's going to bear fruit for years to come. Right. And this marriage has got to be a firm foundation for my kids to know that they can count on, they can stand on, and as they catapult out into life.
Yeah. That's amazing, man.
Yeah. Yeah. That was an early lesson. What a great witness that my father-in-law gave me on that.
Yeah.
Of, hey, no, this is worth the effort and the time, and to make sure that you do those things.
Yeah. That's big. Yeah, no, that's so huge, man. That's such a great practical example too. And I think that we don't appreciate that. And that's why I try to make so many analogies through the 7 pillars, but like this applies to so many things, right? The same people, I think, especially of the generation of millennials and Gen Zers, who are going to really struggle financially later on in life if Social Security is gone, if because a lot of pensions are not there anymore, because they're not actually planning ahead and preparing the fields, you know what I mean? So they can yield those crops down the road. But the same thing goes for relationships. The same thing goes for your physical health. Same thing goes for so many, you know what I mean? Your spiritual life. Like how many people panic on their deathbeds? They're just like, damn, like I really didn't think of my soul very often for the last 70 years, maybe I should have considered that a little bit. And it's like, that's the whole thing. I kind of started seeking excellence almost with the thing. I thought about this a lot in college of the stuff. What are the things when people say, I wish I knew then what I know now? Like, what are those things and how can I learn them in my 20s and not my 80s?
Right.
And that's what I feel like that's the whole thing. It's like the whole goal of life is to learn those things that people have regrets on and like getting ahead of those so you can avoid them in your life. But so many people just are not willing to learn from the mistakes of other people or the lessons learned or the good things. You know what I mean? Like the tip you just shared.
I think about that because you're right. As I looked at the 7 elements that you really focus on, I had the same thought as you go through it. And that desire to live into it. How do you learn? When I read that on your website, it's like, okay, how do we learn from other people? I've not always been open to that in my life. There came a point where I had to realize, hey, I need help. I'm not smart. I don't know how to do everything, right? In all areas, I am not an expert. So am I going to be humble enough to say, okay, where are some experts that I can listen to? But one of the things that I know you do is, as I listen to the different people you've had on your podcast and everything, is that witness though, right? Because a lot of times we can hear things and we can and listen and all that. But boy, when you see the differences made in somebody's life and you see the witness of where they were, where they are now, it's amazing to see the difference. For me, that's what's really spoken to my heart a lot of times as I go, is that witness aspect of it.
Absolutely. 100%. I was really moved in college by Socrates. So I remember taking ancient philosophy fall of 2012, my sophomore year, and just like love this dude. I was like, the way he thinks, all this is so cool. But like the main overview or like the main theme of Socrates' life and like his work was him recognizing that like he had some like oracle, that claimed that he was the wisest man in all of Greece, wisest man. And he was like, no, that can't be true. So he went out and like debated all these different people. And what he came to realize essentially was like the reason why he's the wisest is because he's willing to admit that there's so much he doesn't know.
Yes.
Like he's willing to admit his ignorance. And it's like, I was like, man, that's deep. And I was like, I felt I've always been definitely, I always joke that like between cockiness and self-loathing, I've definitely erred towards cockiness a lot in my life. And so I was like, that's kind of me, right now. And I was like, and I don't know anything. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things I think is beautiful. I've also talked about this. I wish to hear your thoughts on this too, as a, working with so many high schoolers, young adults and things like that. As I always say, in high schoolers can be tougher to work with sometimes because they think they know everything and they know almost nothing. College students start to like realize that they know some things, but they start to realize there's a lot they don't know. And then when you're a young adult, you know even more, but you feel like you know even less because there's so much that gets exposed, when you become a young adult, from getting your oil changed to setting up the Wi-Fi on your own to, you know what I mean, paying rent. Like there's a lot of new experiences versus the shelter that you experience for most people in high school.
Right.
But there's this cockiness that you have to let go of and be like, I just don't know. And that's why I've been so, hungry for knowledge and for wisdom, and why I read so much and consume so many podcasts and YouTube channels and try to talk to great men like you to learn more about these 7 pillars. Cause it's overwhelming how much there is to learn. But if you can admit your ignorance and say, wow, what if I don't have to make the same mistake somebody else made? What if I can avoid that and
Right.
actually live a fulfilled and purpose driven and happy life? And not just for me, but also for my family. That's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think the other thing that happens too, though, is we enter into these conversations because we want to learn more. We humble ourselves. That pride can get in the way of all kinds of stuff. But what I
Yeah.
found is like the people that I'm really close with now, a lot of the men that really speak into my life now are men that I sought out because there was something I saw in them, right?
Right.
And I was humble enough to say, "Hey, tell me about your prayer life. What are you doing? What are you seeking? What does this look like daily as you go?" And a byproduct of that willingness to humble myself and have those conversations is as I've actually grown together with a group of men now that are pillars in my life, right? That will speak into my life. Those relationships that came out of it wasn't just the initial knowledge, right? It's the
Right.
ongoing knowledge that's coming from those relationships that built because one, I was willing to say, I don't know it all, right? And
Yeah.
I would love to journey with somebody who seems to have some knowledge that I don't and some wisdom that I don't. And I spoke early on about that mission trip and that group of men. There are 2 men that are still a part of my journey from that initial group. One of them came along again later on in life when we started the community here at Covecrest. Chris Benzinger became one of those main men in my life from that initial mission trip. And he invited, I went, I just started seeking him out. What's his wisdom? What's a prayer life look like? All those things
That's
as
amazing.
we go. And, Chris is going to help us with this men's retreat that's coming up, which is awesome. But the relationship that came when I said, hey, I don't have it all figured out. Right. And I'm going to
Yeah.
open myself up to these other men who seem to have some wisdom. So that's an awesome part of us being willing to humble ourselves and say, okay, I need it. But I think sometimes that you talk about that cockiness in high school, and
Yeah.
that's the, I think we all know that was just a protective, let me put on some
Right.
insulation to keep from my insecurities from being seen and such as we went, right?
Absolutely.
Not with that cockiness. And you realize later on in life, you really probably weren't that cocky. You were
Right.
scared.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. I love it, man. So yeah. So tell me more about the upcoming retreat you guys have going on.
Yeah, you know what? As we go into it, it's interesting. We spoke early on about David Calavita. One of the things that the Lord has placed on my heart in the last year was, in conversations with my wife Melissa, was the sense of, hey, when is somebody going to tell us it's time to start moving again, start living life again, right? And after the
Mhm.
pandemic and the shutdowns, when is it going to be safe? Is somebody going to come out and say it's safe to go back to church?
Right.
It was amazing here during the pandemic that the thing that was demonized as one of the most dangerous things to do was to go to church
Right.
compared to just stay at home, right? Let's isolate ourselves. So what really came in my heart was this sense of, hey, I believe there are a lot of men out there who are waiting for somebody to tell them, step out and start living again as we go.
Yeah.
So when we started breaking open this retreat, a men's retreat that we do once a year at Camp Hidden Lake in Dahlonega, David and I were chatting about it. And I said, hey, I feel like men are waiting and they need to step out into the breach and encounter the Lord and then start leading their families again, their communities again, all of these areas where we're just waiting for somebody to come to life and do it.
Right.
So that really became the foundation. And both David and I were just kicking around all kinds of stuff. And I'd mentioned Chris Benzinger. He's one of those men that has consistently stepped out and been a leader in different communities and gathered people around to help empower, and just be a part of their journeys as they went through life and how they lead their families, or for young adults and how they engage within their own communities, that type of thing. So we have a great retreat coming up here on March 4th through the 6th in Dahlonega, Georgia, Hidden Lake. And Chris is really going to lead us through. The retreat is called Into the Breach. He's really going to lead us through how the Holy Spirit will bring us fully alive, how it goes from me and Jesus to Jesus. In Acts 2, I think it's in Acts 2, where Peter is walking up into the temple, and
Yeah.
there's a beggar there. And he's like, hey, I don't have anything to give you, but what I do have is yours. And the man ends up walking, because what he did have was the Holy Spirit. He'd been empowered, right?
Right.
He didn't have physical things that the man might want, money or whatever, but what he had, he gave. So really, we're going to walk through how to engage and allow the Holy Spirit to bring us fully alive, and then move forward into the breach to stand out in our families, in our society, school, work, wherever that might be, and start being the men that God has called us to be. Because I think that's what it's going to take for us as a society to move out of this pandemic.
Yeah.
Everybody's waiting for somebody to take a leadership role.
Yeah.
And I think it's got to happen within our families. It's got to happen within our houses first.
For
and
sure.
then we'll start to see it, take
Yeah.
off.
That's beautiful, man. I spent 12 long weeks of my life in Dahlonega, Georgia.
I knew you did. You were actually right down the street from our camp there.
Yeah, wow.
Where that base is. You spent
Camp
some time
Merrill.
up Mount
I sure did. I sure
and
did. Yeah, I had the long recycle phase, so I had to do mountains twice. And it's kind of funny too, because I'm trying to remember the dates. I think I got there on March 11th. March 11th is my mom's birthday, or maybe it was March 12th we went up the first time, because it was still like pretty cold. Yeah, during that first round that we had, and then we had like a 6-week recycle period that we had to wait there. But yeah, so I had to do it again in another 3-week phase, but a lot easier there when it's warm. I can tell you that. But that vegetation grows thick in Georgia. Anyways, I think that sounds amazing, man. I think yeah, such a great topic. I love the effort and the focus around trying to get us out of this pandemic and just like move society forward. Because I think there are just, yeah, I've often just like the sociologist kind of, I studied some of that in college, like in me, and just kind of like the people watcher in me, like loves when you have like little groups of people, or like 10 people, 15 people, and like a decision needs to be made. And like it's so funny, when you're with like indecisive group, and it could even be just 5 people, and like I struggle, man. I try to be humble, and I try to be like, no, I'm just here for the ride, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just gonna go along with the flow. I don't need to lead things all the time. And like just at a certain point, I'm just like, what are you like? Come on, like let's just make a decision. Like, what are the pros? What are the cons? Like, let's execute,
Nathan, I don't see you standing back and not stepping forward into that leadership role.
It's hard, man. I try sometimes, for like the sake of just like being agreeable and trying to be humble. But yeah, man, I'm just like, yeah, a lot of times I just step up, and often it's appreciated with indecisive people, but yeah, I think just to think about that on societal level of how much we need that, how many like school boards and things like need people to stand up against them, or how many parishes where you need men to step up and lead and take initiative and actually be a part of it, so it's not just a priest and 20 women leading the parish.
Right.
Yeah, all types. There's so many different examples.
Well, and I think that so often too, the importance to me of like a men's retreat. Chris and I used to lead men's mission trips together as well, and we go to a place like Honduras or Jamaica. But when you bring a group of men together and you realize, hey, I'm not alone in this. There are groups, we're all going through this together. It kind of opens us up then and helps us be bold to step out if we know that there are other men who are doing the same. 100%. So I think an opportunity to come together and pray, journey, share our hearts with one another. Really, the hope is that it just empowers us to step out, to do it. Because I think when we feel alone, we think we're the only ones who are tackling something, again, we'll shy back, right? Out of fear. If we're not careful, we'll shy back, we'll stay comfortable and wait. And I think we're beyond a waiting stage here. I think that the anxiety in our kids, the anxiety in our society, all of that, just waiting for somebody to bring a message of hope and peace and love out there. So yeah, we're excited about it. I think it'll be a great opportunity.
That's awesome. And how many spots do you have for the retreat?
Yeah, we could take up to about 150 and
150. Wow.
So right now we have about 50 people registered, so we'd love it if a few more jumped in.
Yeah, that's great. And is there a deadline for registration?
No, there's not. They can register up to probably
the 3rd
retreat. Yeah,
that's awesome.
It'd be good to know on the 3rd that you're coming.
Great. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, give a little heads up. Don't just show up day of.
That's right.
No on the spot registrations, but anything before that works. I love it, man. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, highly encourage people to check that out. And obviously I'll have all the links and things like that I'll share it both on Instagram and in the podcast show notes. We'll put it on YouTube as well. And then we have a 15% discount as well with a link, the special link that we have for Seeking Excellence listeners for your registration fees. And so be sure to utilize that if and when you register for this retreat. And so that's 2 weeks before I'm very intrigued. It's 2 weeks before my wedding. So I got to think about if I can get that, approval signature from the future boss there, but yeah, so we'll see how that goes. But I am very, very intrigued in it. And I hope that a lot of the men who are listening today, especially, and I hope the women got a lot from the podcast as well, but I hope the men who listen today really feel encouraged and got some good practical tips. I think we shared a lot of practicality, you especially, in ways that we can grow in our masculinity, live that out in our family life, in our work life, and out in the world and in the church. And so this retreat is a great opportunity to go even deeper into that, to really have a transformative experience that'll really awaken that masculinity in you and help change your life and change your family's life. So I hope many will prayerfully consider going to that.
That's great. Thank you so much. And we'll be praying for you. I didn't realize you were that close to the wedding day. That's exciting time. So we'll keep that in prayer as well.
Thank you. Yeah, very, very much appreciated. St. Joseph's feast day, March 19th.
All right.
So, yeah. So it's coming in hot, but thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on today. I love what you're doing and that inspiration into people's lives to seek excellence, because we get one go around. I look at this and I think often we get one go around to bring glory to God through our lives, to the gift of our lives in this world. So to seek that and to actively go after it is a beautiful thing. So thank you for what you're doing to inspire that in people.
Thank you. I really appreciate that for sure. And so hopefully everybody out there who listened today, I hope you really enjoyed it. Hope it empowered you and encouraged you to seek excellence in everything you do. And we just want to continue to encourage you and just really help you and to equip you to fight hard, to strive to be your best. And so know of our prayers for you, and God bless.